Good evening. Welcome to the Fright Files. My name is Chris Harmon, but tonight you can call me Dr. Fright. Prepare yourself as we embark on 7 frightful tales, such as The Bleeding Portrait, The Spider's Lair, The Well, and The Mirror in the Attic. Before we begin, you must ask yourself one question. Can you hold out to the end? Welcome to the Fright Files. Let's begin. I call this first tale The Spider's Lair. In the secluded village of Dudgemeyer, nestled at the edge of a vast and ancient forest, there exists a chilling tale passed down through generations. The story spoke of a monstrous spider that lurked deep within the woods, weaving its massive webs between the trees. The villagers claimed that the spider lured unsuspecting souls into its lair with promises of unimaginable treasures, only to ensure them in its deadly web and drain them of their blood. Now, folks, you see, most villagers avoided the forest, wary of the ominous legend. But there were always those who believed they could outsmart the ancient creature. Clara, a determined and fearless girl, had heard the tales of the spider since she was just a little child. Her family was struggling. Her father, once a proud farmer, was now too sick to work, and the crops had failed for the third year in a row. Desperation groaned at Clara's heart as she watched her mother fret over the dwindling supplies. The promise of the treasures hidden deep within the forest was too tempting to ignore. It could be the answer to their prayers, a salvation her family desperately needed. Armed with nothing more than a flickering lantern and her father's old hunting knife, Clara made her mind up. She was going to venture into the forest. She was determined to find the spider's lair and receive the treasures and return before dawn. As she entered the woods, the air grew colder. The trees seemed to close in around her. Their gnarled branches, twisting like the fingers of some ancient malevolent entity. The deeper Clara ventured into the darkness of the forest, the darker and darker things became. Darker and darker and darker. The light from her lantern lunged to thick through the thick fog that clung to the ground like a shroud. Every rustle in the undetermined and unforeseen, every snap, every twig, sent a shiver down her spine. But she pressed on, driven by the thought of her family's suffering. The stories of the spider's victim whispered into the back of her mind. but she pushed them aside, focusing on the task at hand. In what felt like hours was walking. Clara finally stumbled upon a clearing. The moonlight filtered through the creepy fog, casting an eerie glow on the scene before her. There, between two towering trees, was a spider's web, a massive intricate structure that glistened like silver in the moonlight. The web was as wide as a house, its threads thick and sticky, stretching from the trees to the other trees. At the center of the web lay a pile of bones and tattered clothing, the grim remains of the spider's previous victim. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she approached the web, her lantern casting long, dancing shadows across the clearing. Her heart pounding in the chest, but she steeled herself, determined to find the treasures that the stories had promised. Just as she took another step forward, the ground beneath her feet suddenly gave way. Clara screamed and screamed as she plummeted into a hidden pit, her lantern slinging from the grasp and shattering on the grounds below. But she landed with a thud. The wind knocked out of her as she found herself tangled in a sticky, suffocating web. The more she struggled, the tighter the web became, wrapping around her limbs and chest like a constricting snake. Panic surged through her as she realized the truth. The truth. There was no treasure, only a trap set by the monstrous spider to lure its prey. From the shadows, the spider emerged, its massive, hairy legs clicking against the ground as it approached. Its body was the size of a horse, covered in thick black bristles, and its eyes, 8 gleaming orbs, reflected the dim light of the moon. The spider's fangs, sharp and glistening with venom, protruded from its grotesque mouth as it slowly descended upon Clara, hunger burning in its eyes. Clara's mind raced as the spider loomed over its fangs, inches from her face. In a last desperate effect, she reached for her father's knife, her fingers fumbling to free it from its shelf as her wrist. With a fancy cry, she plunged the blade into the spider's soft underbelly. The creature let out a deafening screech, its legs falling as it recoiled in pain. Blood oozed from the wounds, dripping out onto the web. The spider retreated into its shadows, its screeches echoing through the forest as it disappeared from sight. For a moment, Clara thought she had won, that she had driven the creature away. But as she lay there, tangled in its web, she realized the horrible truth. She was too weak to free herself, and the spider was merely waiting for its prey to succumb to exhaustion. The forest fell silent once more, the only sound the faint rustling of the web as it tightened around her. Clara's strength ebbed away with each passing minute, her vision growing dim as the cold night of the air settled over the clearing. The stories had been true. There was no treasure. There was only a deadly snare that had claimed countless lives before her. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, Clara's breath grew shallow. She knew she wouldn't last much longer. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her, was the glimmer of the spider's eyes watching her from the shadows, waiting patiently for her to succumb. The forest would soon claim another victim, and the web would be ready for the next unfortunate soul drawn by the promise of riches. And as so the legend of the spider's lair continues, a tale of greed, doom, whispered by the villagers to warn others from venturing into the cursed woods. You've just heard the story of the spider's lair. Now I want to say hello to everybody in the chat for whom is fan of Dr. Fright. And as we plunge into the next frightful tale, I must warn you, as this tale has some gruesome, frightful effects. Because this tale is entitled The Witching Hour. You see, in a small village tucked away in a forgotten corner of the woods, the clocks had stopped at midnight for as long as anyone could ever remember. The villagers spoke in hushed tone about the witching hours, a cursed hour that lingered eternally, trapped those who were unfortunate enough to be awake in a twisted version of reality. You see, they believed it was the work of a powerful witch, wrapped in her final moments, which had cursed the town to live in a perpetual state of dread as her last act of vengeance. And Sophie, a young girl with a restless mind and a persistent cause of insomnia, had never given much thought to the old tales. But on this particular night, as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, she noticed something strange. The clock on her nightstand had stopped at exactly midnight. She frowned and reached for it, shaking it gently, but the hands removed from frozen. The hands remained in a frozen state. Curious, she glanced out of the window, her eyes landing on the wall clock, which also displayed the same time, midnight. Even the antique grandfather clock downstairs as she went and took a look was also struck and stuck at midnight, known for its steady chimes. It had fallen silent. A shiver ran down her spine as she peered out of her window. The world outside seemed eerie still, bathed in a cold shiver. Light of the full moon glared. The village usually so alive, even at night, with the sounds of owls and the distant rustle of the leaves, was now completely silent, and the moon hung in high in the sky, casting long, hunting shadows that seemed to stretch across the village like a dark figures. Sophia tried to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping into her thoughts. She pulled her blanket tighter around her, willing herself to go back to sleep. But sleep wouldn't come, no, no, no. Instead, her ears picked up on something strange, soft creaks and groans as if the house itself was alive and shifting. The shadows on the walls began to move, not in the usual gentle flicker of candlelight, but with a life of their own, glowing across the room as if they were searching for something. Her heart pounded as she realized she was no longer in the familiar world she knew. She had slipped into the witching hours, a time where the boundaries between the living and the dead, the real and the unreal, become a blur. Fighting the fear threatening to paralyze her, Sophia climbed out of her bed. Her bare feet touched the cold wooden floor, and she winced as the boards creaked beneath her. The air in the room had grown thick, almost suffocating, and it smelled faintly of something old, like a forgotten cellar that had been sealed away for centuries. The door to her bedroom, which had been closed when she went to bed, now stood wide open ajar, revealing a corridor bathed in moonlight. With trembling hands, Sophia picked up her lantern and stepped into the hallway. The shadows seemed to follow her, skidding along the walls, whispering her name, Sophie, 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 her name, in voices she could hear barely rose above a breath. And as she moved through the house, nothing felt right. The furniture was askew as if it had been pushed by some unseen force. The paintings on the walls now depicted twisted, nightmarish versions of the scenery landscapes they once were. The mirrors, which had always avoided in the dark, now showed distorted reflections, figures that moved when she did not eyes that glitter with malice. You see, the house was alive, breathing around her, and the more she explored it, the more she felt the presence of something watching her, something waiting for her. Her heart pounded in her chest, a relentless rumble that echoed in the suffocating silence. In the dim light of her lantern, she noticed strange symbols carved in the walls, cryptic ancient marks that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. She reached out to touch one, and the whispering around her grew louder, more instant. The voices were no longer just whispering, they were chanting and repeating the same words over and over and over and over and over, a language she didn't understand. But she felt deep in her bones. The air grew colder as she reached the base of the stairs leading to the attic, a place she had rarely ventured. The chanting rose to a crescent as she climbed, her legs heavy as if the house itself were trying to pull her back to stop her from reaching whatever awaited her above. When she pushed open the attic door, the air was freezing. Moonlight filtered through the dusty windows, casting long shadows across the floor. In the center of the room stood a figure, a woman with hollow eyes and skin cracked. Her presence so overpowering that Sophia couldn't move. It was the witch, the very one which had cursed the town. Her body twisted and broken, yet filled with a dark, consuming power. You've come. You've come, the witch whispered. Her voice rage echoed of something that had once been human. Another soul awakened during the hour that never ends. Sophia backed away, but the door behind her slammed shut, trapping her in the room with the witch. What do you want? Sophia managed to ask, her voice so trembling. The witching hour is eternal, the witch said, stepping closer to her, movements unnatural like a marionette. controlled by invisible strings, and now you are part of it. But you can choose your fate. Become my servant, and I will grant you the freedom within this house, or resist and be trapped here, your soul bound to the hour forever. Sophia's mind raced. She couldn't serve the creature, but the thought of being trapped in this nightmarish, never seemed to daylight again, was terrifying. She gathered what courage she had left and shook her head. I won't be your servant, she said, her voice firmer than she felt. I won't be your servant. The witch's hollow eyes seemed to darken, and a smile twisted her cracked lips. Then the hour is yours for all eternity, she hissed before her from dissolved into the shadows, her laughter echoing through the attic. The room wrapped and twisted around Sophia. The walls seemed to close in on her. She stumbled back, her head spinning until she found herself back in her bed. For a moment, she thought it had all been a terrible dream. But the room was just as cold, just as still, and the clock on her nightstand still read midnight. Breathing heavily, she turned to the mirror on the wall, hoping to see something familiar, something real, but the reflections that stared back at her wasn't her own. The witch's face, twisted and grinning, looked out at her eyes, gleaming with dark satisfaction. Sophia tried to scream, but no sound came out. Her reflection mirrored her terror, the witch's mouth stretching into the impossible wide grin. She could feel the witch's presence inside her, twisting her thoughts, wrapping her reality. She was no longer Sophie, the girl with the insomnia. She was something else, eternally, something cursed, something bound to the witching hour. The clocks remained frozen at midnight, the village trapped in that hour forever, and Sophia, or what she had become, waited in the darkness, ready to ensure that the next soul, unfortunate enough to awaken during the cursed hour, the witching hour. I want to thank everybody in the chat and everybody watching because you are fans of Dr. Fright. But now we must take a darker plunge into the night. We must take our souls down even to the more deeper depths, because I'm afraid this next story may be too much for some to handle. The wishing well of darkness. Because you see, in the heart of a remote fog, shrewd the villagers nestled between craggy hills, stood an ancient well unlike any other. This was no ordinary well. The villagers whispered it was a wishing well, its waters rumored to be enchanted. Generations had posed down tales of how the well could grant the deepest desires of those who tossed in a coin and make a silent plea. Samuel, a boy no older than 14, lived with his family on a small, struggling farm at the edge of the village. The land was barren, the crops withered, and their livestock weak. Samuel's parents toiled from the dawn until dusk, their faces lined with worry and exhaustion. While his younger siblings went to bed hungry more often than not, Samuel could no longer bear to see his family suffer, and each night as he lay awake listening to the wind rustling through the skeletal trees, the tales of the wishing well echoed in his mind. Desperation gnawed at Samuel's heart, and once cold, moonless night, he made up his mind. Slipping out of bed, he crept quietly through the house and carefully not to wake his family. He clutched a single worn coin, the only one he had in his hands, its edges smooth from the years of handling. With a deep breath, Samuel set out towards the wishing well, the village silent around him, save for the distant howls of the wolves in the hills. The well stood at the center of an average town, cleaning its stones thick with moss. An aged Samuel approached cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest as he peered into the dark, yawning mouth of the well. He hesitated for a moment, the warnings of the villagers ringing in his ears, but the image of his family's grown face spawned him. Closing his eyes, he whispered his wish, wealth and prosperity, wealth and prosperity for my family, enough to lift them out of this misery. With a trembling hand, he tossed the coin into the well. The water below rippled, the sounds unnaturally loud in the still night. As Samuel leaned over to listen, a voice, as soft and eerie like the wind through the trees, echoed up from the depths of the well, promising that his wish would be granted. Samuel shivered at the sound, an icy dread settling in his bones, but he forced himself to stand tall, believing that he had done what was necessary. In the days that followed, Samuel's wish seemed to come true. The once barren fields around their farm began to bloom with vibrant crops. The soil rich and fertile. The animals, once frail and sick, grew stronger and healthy. Their cold, glossy their coats glossy under the sun, and as if by magic, money began to appear. A hidden stash of coins beneath the floorboards, a forgotten debt repaid by a distant relative. Samuel's family rejoiced, their spirits lifted by the sudden turn of fortune, and for a brief moment Samuel felt a flicker of hope. But with the newfound prosperity came a creeping shadow that darkened their lives. You see, it started with his mother, who began to complain of strange, unexplainable fatigue. Her once lively eyes grew dull, and her skin turned pale, as if drained of life. Soon after, his father was struck by some illness, his strong, firm, withering away, as if something was spiring and draining his soul. His strength weakened. Even Samuel's younger siblings, who had been so full of energy, become lifeless, their faces hollow and their laughter gone, 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 gone. And Samuel watched in horror as the family, once revitalized by wealth, now whistled away before his eyes. He had wished for their prosperity, but instead he had brought them the brink of death. The realization struck him like a blow. This was the terrible price of the well's magic. The wealth that had come so easily was being paid for with the lives of those he loved. Determined to undo the curse he had unleashed, Samuel returned to the well, his heart heavily with the guilt and fear. The night was as dark as the one when he had first made his wish. The well silhouette looming like a grim sentinel. He approached it with a sense of dread, knowing that the well's magic was not to be taken lightly. As he stood at the edge of the well, he shouted into its depths, pleading for the well to take back his wish. The water below was still, the air around him heavy and oppressive. Then the same eerie voice echoed up from the well, but this time it was filled with mocking laughter. Wishes cannot be undone. Wishes cannot be undone. Wishes can never be undone, the voice whispered, echoing. But another scare face may break the curse. Another sacrifice may break this curse. Samuel's blood ran cold as the voice continued, offering him a chance. If he wished to save his family, he would have to offer something even more precious, his own life. The well demanded a soul to balance the scales, and Samuel knew that it was the only way to atone for his mistake. With a heavy heart, he climbed onto the edge of the well, the darkness below yawning like an abyss. Taking a final trembling breath, Samuel whispered a tearful goodbye to his family and threw himself into the well's icy depths. The water churned violently. The souls of his screaming echoed through the village and waking the villagers from their slumber. They rushed to the well, but when they arrived, they found it dry and empty. The water gone as if it had never existed. There was no sign of Samuel, only a profound silence that settled over the clearing. The next morning, Samuel's family awoke to find themselves miraculously cured. The cold had returned to their cheeks. The color had returned to their cheeks. Their strength restored as if nothing had ever happened. But the wealth they had gained was gone. The wealth was gone. The money was gone, vanished as if it had never even existed. The family searched for Samuel, calling his name day after day, but he was nowhere to be found. The villagers, hearing of what happened, sealed the well, fearful of its dark power. But the legend of the wishing well lives on, a cautionary tale of greed, sacrifice, whispered by those remembered, whispered by those who remembered the boy who had given everything to save his family. You are watching the Fright Files and the Well of Darkness. Congratulations on making it this far through tonight's tales. We have yet but more tales to tell you as we get darker and darker and more frightful for each and every one of you out there. Can you withstand this next tale, as this one goes as dark as one can go, as I tell you a tale of blood, the bleeding portrait. Nora had always been drawn to the mysteries of the supernatural, so when her family moved into the grand decaying mansion of the edge of the village, when her family moved into the grand decaying mansion, she couldn't contain her excitement. The mansion was steeped in history and whispered secrets, but what intrigued her the most was the legend of the bleeding portrait, a painting of a beautiful woman that was said to bleed every night at midnight. Every night at exactly the stroke of midnight. The portrait, however, hung in the main hall. It was a source of fear and fascination for the villagers, who believed it was cursed. hunted by the spirit of a woman who had been murdered within the mansion's walls long ago. For the moment Nora saw the portrait, she felt a strange connection to it. The woman in the painting was stunning, with flowing dark hair and deep sorrow in her eyes that seemed to hold a world of pain. But yet there was something else in those eyes, something that made Nora feel as if the woman was watching her, following her every single move. The mansion was cold and drafty, its hallways filled with echoes and the secrets of dust and decay. But it was the portrait that captivated Nora, drawing her back to the main hall again and again and again. Her family was less enthused. They avoided the hall at night, muttering about the coldness of the room and the uneasy feeling that crept over them whenever they passed by the portrait. But Nora was determined to uncover the truth. The rumors of the bleeding portrait that circulated for generations, and she was eager to see for herself if the legend was real. One night, unable to sleep, Nora decided that this would be the night. This would be the night she would find out. She wrapped herself in a thick blanket and tiptoed downstairs, careful not to wake her parents. The mansion was eerie silent, the only sound the creaking of the old wooden floors beneath her feet. She made her way to the main hall, her heart pounding in her chest as she approached the portrait. The woman in the painting seemed to stare directly at Nora, her sorrowful expression more pronounced in the dim light. Nora glanced at the clock on the wall. It was almost midnight. She took a deep breath and settled herself in a chair opposite the portrait, her eyes never leaving the woman's face. As the clock struck midnight, the air in the room grew colder, and Nora felt the shiver running down her spine. She watched in stunned silence as the dark stain began to spread across the canvas, staring from the woman's eyes. Blood, thick and crimson, slowly tricked down her cheeks. Pooling at the bottom of the frame, the blood was dripping. The sight was horrifying, yet Nora couldn't look away. She was both terrified and mesmerized by the sight before her. The mansion, already dead silent, seemed to hold its breath. The faint at first, Nora heard the sounds of soft sobbing, the sound echoing through the hall, filling the space with a sorrow so deep it was almost tangible. The shadows around her seemed to stretch and grow, creeping closer as if drawn to the bleeding portrait. The woman's expression shifted, her sorrow turning into something more painted, more desperate. Nora's heart raced as the temperature in the room dropped further, her breath coming out visible puffs of air. Nora was about to flee, the primal instincts to run, screaming at her to leave this place, when something even more impossible suddenly happened. The woman in the portrait moved. Her painting hands reached out from the canvas, her fingers curling as if grasping for something, grasping for Nora, reaching. The hand was no longer paint, but flesh, cold and clammy, and it gripped Nora's wrist with an iron force. Nora screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the oppressive atmosphere in the room. She tried to pull away, but her hands gripped tightly, dragging her closer to the canvas. The world around her began to spin, the walls of the mansion blurring and fading into the darkness. The last thing she saw was the woman's face, her eyes now filled with an unholy light, her mouth twisted into a grim smile. When Nora's parents awake the next morning, they found the house as they had left, except for one thing. In the main hall, the portrait still hung in its place, but the woman's expression had changed. Her once sorrowed eyes now burned with a vengeful fire, and her lips were curled into a cruel smile. But what struck them the most was the new figure that had appeared in the background of the painting. Nora, her face frozen in expression of sheer terror, was now a part of the portrait. Her features were unmistakable, but her eyes, once filled with life and curiosity, were now wide and vacant, forever trapped in the painting she had dared to explore. The blood continued to drip from the woman's eyes, and the house remained as cold and silent as ever, its secrets hidden within its cursed walls. The villagers, hearing of the latest misfortune to befall the mansion, whispered among themselves, but dared not approach. The legend of the bleeding portrait grew a tale caution for those who would meddle in the unknown. The mansion stood as it always had, grand and decaying, with the portrait hanging in the main hall, its new inhabitant doomed to an eternal silence, unending horror. The portrait waiting nightly, bleeding, reaching for its next victim to come along. The bleeding portrait is not one to take lightly. If you ever approach the mansion and dare to go inside, be wary of the portrait, for at midnight it just may take your soul. Let's go deeper into the depths of the unknown. Let's go real deep, because this next story is about as deep as you can go. And if you ask why does this figure look so spooky, so frightful, it is because this story is titled The Puppet Master. You've heard of the Chucky doll. You've heard of a lot of strange and bewildering stories. You've heard of haunted dolls, haunted puppets. But have you ever heard of a story quite so frightful as what you're about to embark on? You see, in the heart of a small isolated town, where the nights stretched on it forever and the shadows seemed to linger just a little too long, there was a chilling tale whispered among the villagers that spoke of the puppet master, a sinister figure said to control the townsfolk like marionettes, manipulating them to fulfill its dark, twisted desires. Now, some believed the puppet master was a spirit of vengeance. Others said he was a remnant of an ancient curse. But all agree on one thing: those who fell under its control were never the same again. This story is really going to be, well, you see, Lily, a young girl with an insatiable curiosity and a love for stories, had grown up hearing the rumors of the puppet master. Like most good children, she had dismissed the tales of nothing more than a ghost story, meant to scare people. But as she grew older, Lily began to notice strange changes in the people around her. It started with suitable things. Neighbors who once smiled and waved become distant, their expressions vacant, the movements stiff and a robotic state. The peculiar behavior spread through the town like a silent plague. The baker, who used to hum cheerful tunes as he kneaded dough, now moved with jerky, unnatural motions, his hands twitching as if they pulled by unseen strings, and the old woman who always sat on her porch knitting no longer spoke a damn word. Her eyes glazed over, her fingers working the rest needles in a slow, methodical rhythm. It was as if she didn't give a damn anymore. It was as if the entire town had fallen under a spell, their free will stripped away by some malevolent force. And then, then one evening, as Lily walked home from school, smiling cheerfully, she saw something that made her blood run cold as hell. Standing beneath a flickering street lamp was a man. She recognized Mr. Turner, the town's postman, but something was terribly wrong. His eyes were wide and vacant, his mouth twisted in a sinister grin, and that didn't reach. His hands moved in a strange, jerky motions, as if he was struggling against invisible bonds. Terrified but unable to look away, Lily watched as Mr. Turner turned and began to walk down the street, his movements stiff and unnatural. Curiosity battled her with fear, and Lily found herself following him at a distance, his heart pounding, her heart pounding in her chest. The man led her through the darkened streets, past the quiet houses where the lights had all been extinguished, until they reached the outskirts of town. There, at the very edge of town, stood an old abandoned theater. The building had been left to decay years ago, and its once grand now crumbled and overgrown with ivy. The silence of the displayed structure sent a shiver down Lily's spine, but something compelled her to keep going, her feet moving almost of their own accord as she followed Mr. Turner inside. The interior of the theater was dark and musty, the air thick with the scent of mold and dust. As Lily's eyes adjusted to the gloom, she saw row upon row of wooden puppets, row after row of wooden puppets, row after row, hanging from the ceiling, their lifeless bodies swaying gently as if in a breeze that didn't exist. The strings led up to a darkened stage. The stairs led up to a darkened stage as the fear at the end of the room. The shadows seemed to deepen, obscuring whatever lurked within. Lily's breath caught in her throat as a figure emerged from the shadows, a tall, thin man with a face hidden beneath a hood. His fingers twitched and flexed as if manipulating invisible strings, and as he moved, the puppets above him began to twink and twerk, their limbs moving in eerie synchronization with the puppet master's hands. Now, to Lily's horror, Mr. Turner stepped onto the stage, his movements matching the puppet master's every command. It was as if there was no longer in control. It was as if he was no longer in control of his own body, his limbs moving against his will as he danced and twerked the puppets. The sight of the once cheerful postman is now a lifeless marionette filled Lily with a cold, paralyzing fear. The puppet master turned his head towards her, and though she could not see his face, she felt the weight of his gaze settling upon her. His fingers twitched again, and suddenly Lily felt a strange sensation wash over her, a tingling in her limbs, a tingling in her muscles. She tried to move, tried to run, tried to move, tried to run and run, but her body refused to obey. It was as if invisible strings had wrapped around her, binding her to the puppet master's will. Lily's heart raced as she struggled against the force controlling her, but it was no use. Her feet began to move, carrying her hands towards the stage where the puppet master awaited her, his hands twisting and turning as if pulling her strings. She wanted to scream, to cry out for help, but her voice was silent, trapped inside the throat by the same force that controlled her body. The puppet master's face, still hidden beneath the hands, tilted in a grotesque mimicry of delight as he watched Lily's attempts to resist. Her body moved with stiff, unnatural motions, her limbs jerking and twitching as if she was forced to dance, forced to do the puppet master's control. The stage beneath her feet, cold and unyielding, the thick air, the scent of the decay and dismay. As Lily's movements became more frantic, the puppet master pulled her strings tighter, his control over her growing stronger with each passing moment. The last thing she saw, the last thing before the darkness claimed her, was the twisted, grinning face of the puppet master as he orchestrated her final dance, his hands moving with a terrible grin. The next morning, the town was eerie quiet. The villagers went about their day with vacant expressions on their faces, their movements stiff and unnatural. No one noticed that Lily was missing, or that the old abandoned theater on the stage on the edge of town had them all, and their theater remained dark and silent, waiting for its next performance. In the shadows, the puppet master grinned, laughing, and the puppets swayed gently in the darkness, their strings ready to be pulled. The town had become his stage, and the people in marionettes doomed to dance to the dark tunes for as long as he willed it. The puppet master awaits his next victim to dance on the stage. You have just heard the tale of the puppet master, and I see all of the Fright fans are still here in the chat room, and some of you watching on television have made it thus far. And now we move to our next tale. Our next horrifying tale that glows even darker than the one that just came before you. This is the tale of the mirror in the cellar. But I gotta warn you, when you hear this story, I want you to be very careful, because sometimes things are not what they seem. Sometimes even a story itself, let's just say, listen and watch at your own risk. Because you see at the far edge of town, where the streets gave way to the overgrown fields and the houses stood with sagging roofs and peeling paint, there was a house that no one spoke of. Its windows were dark, the woodwork cracked and splintered, and the garden long ago claimed by the wild broombees. But it wasn't the house itself that made people shiver as they passed by. It was the cellar beneath it, a place of dark legends whispered amongst the children and avoided their elders. The cellar, they said, was home to Mirror, a cursed object that trapped the souls of those who dared to look into it, pulling them into the twisted reflection of their own lives. Now, when James's family moved into the old house, she felt an thrill of excitement. When Jasmine moved her family to the house, the excitement grew strong. She was thrilled. She was a girl who loved old places, the kind of places that seemed to hold secrets, really excited her in their cracking floorboards and folded wallpaper. While her parents were focused on getting the house settled, unboxing boxes, cleaning, and making the house livable, Jasmine was drawn to the more mysterious corners of the house, of the new home. She had heard the whispers from the children at school, tales of the mirror in the cellar, and the horrors it held. But Jasmine was a skeptic, nah. By the nature, she didn't believe in ghosts or curse. To her, the stories were just that, just simply stories, invented to keep children away from the dangers, dark places like old cellars. Still, there was something about the idea of a haunted mirror that sparkled in her eyes, her curiosity. And so one afternoon, while her parents were out shopping for supplies, Jasmine decided to explore the cellar and see for herself. The door to the cellar was at the back of the house, hidden behind a curtain of cobwebs. It creaked loudly as she pulled it open. The hinges pushed the hinges protesting after years of disuse. A narrow staircase descended into the darkness below, each step growing under her weight as she moved slowly, as she made her way down, down, down. The air grows colder with every single step, down, 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 carrying with it the musty scent of damp stone and old wood. Jasmine had a small flashlight, its weak beam cutting through the thick shadows as she reached for the bottom of the stairs. The cellar was just as she had imagined, dark, cold, and filled with forgotten years. Old furniture lay covered in dusty sheets, and crates stretched against the walls were slowly crumbling to pieces. But at the far end of the room, something stood out, a tall, dark shape, shrewd and grim in dust. As Jasmine approached, her breath caught in her throat. It was the mirror. Just as the stories had been told, there was the mirror. The mirror was enormous. It was framed and carved with intricate designs that had long since faded. A thick layer of dust covered its surface, obscuring the reflection within. Jasmine hesitated for a moment, a faint whisper of doubt creeping into her mind, but she quickly shook it off. It was just a mirror, after all. With a determined breath, Jasmine reached out of her wide. Jasmine reached out and wiped away the dust with her sleeve. As the grime cleared, her reflection slowly became into view. But as soon as she saw herself in the mirror, a chill ran down her spine. Her reflection was there, but something was wrong. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. The eyes staring back at her were dark and hollow with empty voids that seemed to suck the light from the room. And the mouth. Her mouth was twisted in a cruel smile that didn't match the expression on her face. Jasmine blinked, trying to shake off the unease that settled over her. She lifted her hand to touch her face, and the reflection did the same. But there was something unnatural about the way it moved. Too smooth, too precise. It was as if the reflection was mimicking her actions with a mocking precision. A puppet controlled by some unseen force. Her fear began to clown Her fear began to claw at Jasmine's heart, but she couldn't look away. The mirror had her gaze, drawing her deeper into its cold, reflective surface. The room around her seemed to grow darker, the air heavier, as if the cellar itself was closing in on her. Her breath quickened, her pulse pounding in her ears. She watched her reflection step forward, out of sync with her movements, the smile on its face, wiped, stretching into something grotesque and inhuman. Before Jasmine could react, the reflection reached out of the mirror, its cold, glossy hands wrapped around her wrist. The touch sent a shock of icy pain through her arm. Freezing in her place, she stepped in to pull away. The reflection was too strong. It gripped, tightening as it began to drag her towards the mirror. No, no, no! Jasmine screamed, her voice echoing off the stone walls of the cellar. She struggled, pulling with all her might, but the mirror pulled was relentless. The mirror's pull was relentless. The the world around her wrapped and distorted. The cellar twisting and turning as if were being sucked into a vortex. Sucked into a vortex. The mirror surface rippled like water, and before she knew it, Jasmine was pulled into the cold, reflective depths. As she crossed the threshold, the world around her changed. The cellar was gone, replaced by a twisted version of her own life, a place where everything was dark and wrong. The house had loved decay and crumbling the walls, covered the grim and the air thick with the scent. The people she knew were there too, but they were twisted, their faces controlled with the cruel smiles and hollow eyes, just like the reflection that had pulled her in. Jasmine tried to scream, to cry out for help, but no sound came from her lips. She was trapped in the darkness. She was trapped in the darkness, distorted world, a prisoner of the mirror's curse. The last thing she saw before the world folded back to her reflection, standing on the other side of the mirror, smiling that came cruel smile, smiling that some cruel smile, its dark eyes filled with malevolent glee. The next family to move to the old house found the mirror in the cellar, its surface cracked and dusty. When they looked into it, they saw only their own reflections, never knowing that Jasmine was trapped inside. Jasmine was trapped inside, waiting in the twisted world beyond the gloss. Her soul bounced to the mirror, waiting for someone to take her place. The stories about the mirror in the cellar continued to be whispered, but no one knew the truth. No one knew the truth. No one knew the truth. The mirror remained in the cellar, waiting for its next victim to peer into its depths and be lost forever. This haunting tale of the cursed mirror still makes headlines to this day for those who tell its story, for those who dare to venture to the area and go down to the cellar and look at the mirror, will also be poured into the curse. For everybody in the chat room, thank you for watching the Fright Files. We have yet but one more tale, one more story to tell. As we get into story number 7, the most frightful tale of them all, the most horrifying story of the night. Congratulations, you have made it this far. Can you survive the final story of the evening, the most frightful tale of the night? the House of Echoes. On the outskirts of a forgotten town lies a mansion known only as the House of Echoes. Abandoned for decades, the mansion is a decaying relic of a begotten era. Its once grand facade now overtaken by ivy and knot and rot. The townsfolk avoid it, speaking in husbands' whispers of the terrible events that transpired there. You see a family slaughtered in the hands, a family slaughtered in their beds, with no sight of the killer. Some say the house itself was cursed, a beacon of restless spirits. No one has dared to go into the mansion in years, but there are always rumors, lights flickering in the windows, shadows moving behind the cracked glass, and the faint sounds of voices carried on the wind. Lucas, a man fascinated by paranormal, decides to investigate the mansion. He's heard of these stories all his life and is determined to uncover the truth behind the House of Echoes. Armed with only a flashlight, a notebook, and its camera, Lucas arrives at the mansion just as the sun begins to set. The air is thick with a scent of damp, earth, and decay, and the wind whispers through the trees as if warning him to turn back. But Lucas is undetermined. He pushes open the rusty iron gate, its hinges groaning in protest, and steps onto the overgrown path leading to the front door. The mansion looms before him, its windows dark and empty, like the hollow eyes of a skull. He takes a deep breath and pushes open the door, the wood crackling loudly as it swings inward. Inside, the air is cold, heavy, the walls lined with peeling wallpaper and dust-covered portraits. The floorboards creak beneath Lucas's feet as he moves through the foyer. His flashlight casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. He can feel the weight of the house pressing down on him, as if the walls are alive, watching his every single move. He begins his investigation, taking photos and notes as he explores the first floor. The rooms are filled with decaying furniture, the cobwebs hanging like tattered curtains in the corners. But it's the silence of the uneasiness that's got him the most on edge. Unnatural silence that seemed to swallow every sound. As Lucas climbs the grand staircase to the second floor, he hears something, a faint sound, almost imperceptible, like the distant echoes of the voices. He freezes, listening intensely, and there it is again. Whispers coming from somewhere. Deeper in the house, his heart pounds in his chest. As he follows the sound, whispers groaning louder and more instant. The hallway at the bottom of the stairs is lined with doors, each one leading to a different room, a different bedroom. The whispers seem to be coming from the end of the hall, from the last door on the right. Lucas approached slowly, his flashlight flickering as if struggling to stay lit. The air grows colder with each step, his breath visible in the dim light. He reaches the door and hesitates, his hand trembling as if he reaches for the doorknob. The whispers are loud, now a canopy of voices all speaking at once. The words unintelligible, they filled with unmistakable sense of dread. He pushes the door open, and the whispers stop abruptly. Replaced by an oppressive silence, the room beyond its bedroom untouched by time. The bed is neatly made, the furniture undisturbed, but the air is thick with a sense of unease. Lucas stepped inside, his flashlight sweeping across the room, and that's when he sees it. A figure standing at the corner, shrewd in darkness. The figure is tall and thin, its features obscured by the shadows, but as Lucas's flashlight flickers, he catches a glimpse of its face, pale, hollow eyes with a mouth twisted into a ghostly grin. The figure steps forward, and Lucas realizes what horror, with what horror that it's not walking, but gliding its feet, never touching the ground. The whisper returns, louder, now filling the room with a mocking chorus of voices. The figure rises, its hand pointing directly at Lucas, and he feels a cold, suffocating presence engulf all over him. He tries to move, he tries to run, but his body's frozen, paralyzed by an unseen force. As the figure moves closer, Lucas feels his mind slipping, his thoughts growing. The whispers are once inside his head, now drowning out his own thoughts, filling him with a sense of overwhelming dread. The figure reaches out its cold and fingers, brushing against his forehead. In that moment, Lucas sees everything: the murders, the blood, the soaked, the trails that consumed the family in their final moments. The figure's grin widens, and Lucas realizes with a shocking jolt that it's feeding on his strong strength from the terror. He struggles to break free, but it's no use. The fatigue grips, tightens, and the feels in his soul is being pulled from his body, drawn into the darkness that surrounds him. And then, just suddenly, it's over. The fireplace, the figure released him, and Lucas collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. The whispers fade, the room grounding eerily, silent. Once more, but nothing is different. The land feels the same. The house is no longer watching him, no longer pressing down on him. It's as if the house has taken what it wanted and it's now satisfied. It's now satisfied. Lucas staggers to his feet, his body trembling with exhaustion and fear. He stumbles out of the room, down the hallway, and out of the house, never once looking back. And as he reaches for the safety of the outside world, he takes a deep breath, and the cold night air filling his lungs. But he wakes up. He walks up away from the house, echoes. He hears something, a faint whisper carried on the wind, just as the edge of the hearing. He steps, his heart raising and listening. The whispers his own name, echoing back to him in the darkness. And then he understands. The house didn't just take his fleet. The house didn't just take his fear. It took a part of him, a fragment of his soul, leading him forever bound to the curse of the mansion. No matter where he goes, no matter how far he runs, he will never be free from the house of the echoes. For those who is alive and willing, for the house is alive and it's always finding a way to feed. Thank you for watching the Fright Files. Thank you for making this episode number 7. Thank you for making it to this episode number 7, as you are now a legend of the Fright Files. For every soul that comes to this Friday Fest and makes it through all 7 stories, are fans of Dr. Fright and the Fright Files. I want to thank everybody here tonight for coming and making it till the end. Folks, I must return to the depths of hell, but I will be back next week for 7 more tales from Dr. Fright on another episode of the Fright Files.